We are putting a lot of emphasis on food as the problem and as the solution. And in my experience, yes, it's one slice of the pie, but as I try to convey in my book, there are so many things that feed into your child's health and well-being. How much sleep they get. Is it quality sleep? How much time they spend in front of screens? And does that time take away their ability to move or to explore other interests? How much movement are kids getting? What's the family attitude about bodies? What are the family attitudes about food and eating? There's a lot of ingredients to this recipe for building a healthy child. And I think only focusing on food just shortchanges a lot of what parents and families can be doing out there to cultivate healthy kids who feel good about themselves.
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. So, what comes to mind when you think about raising healthy kids? We often focus on physical health, things like height, weight, and nutrition. But today, we're taking a more holistic look at health with return guest, nutritionist and author Jill Castle. Specifically, we're diving into her new book, Kids Thrive at Every Size: How to Nourish Your Big, Small, or In-Between Child for a Lifetime of Health and Happiness. In our conversation, we explore why emotional well-being is just as important as physical health, how the COVID pandemic has impacted kids' nutrition, and the often overlooked difference between feeding and eating. Jill highlights how family culture and values shape a child's overall health and why it's so important to foster a body-neutral environment at home. We also touch on the connection between executive function and eating, plus the role screens and media play in shaping body image. Before we dive in, a little bit about Jill. She's one of the nation's leading childhood nutrition experts, blending research with practical advice. She believes children can thrive at any size and challenges us to think differently about their health. Jill's the founder and CEO of The Nourished Child, a nutrition education platform, and the mother of 4 adultish kids. This conversation feels especially timely as our kids are being bombarded with messages about how their bodies should look and behave all the time. Now more than ever, it's crucial to provide them with a strong foundation for understanding health. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jill Castle. Hey, Jill, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
It's been a while since you were last on the show. We had a really good conversation about nutrition, and listeners, there'll be a link in the show notes. Definitely go back and check that out. It's a really good conversation. But we are here to talk about your new book, which is called Kids Thrive at Every Size. And as we were just discussing before we hit record, I said, this book isn't what I thought it was going to be necessarily. And you said, yeah, well, people were saying, I thought it was going to be a book about nutrition. And you said, well, nothing's just about nutrition anymore. So I would love to hear a little bit about your personal or professional or both evolution and how this book came to be in the forefront of your mind. And you're like, this is the book I have to get out into the world.
That's a great question. So I've worked with kids of larger size and smaller size and mid-size my entire career of 33 plus years. And I think more recently, since COVID, I've watched children in larger and smaller bodies experience more mental health concerns related to their bodies. But I've also watched the medical field evolve, or I guess I've recognized that over time, we have been focusing so much on physical health, and it's come, I believe, at the expense of emotional well-being. I kept noticing this, and then watching sort of this polarization of here's a psychological model for helping kids be healthy. Here's the medical model for helping kids be healthy. And the two weren't always agreeing with each other. And I was feeling very conflicted about that, while also recognizing that it just is causing so much more confusion for parents. And how can we really help them raise healthy kids, but who are also happy kids and comfortable in the skin that they're in? I just kept noodling over this and realizing that there really isn't a guide out there for parents to follow this path of raising healthy and happy kids. And what has that caused, right? What has that contributed to? And I came up with this whole new model called Whole Child Healthy, which incorporates both physical health and emotional well-being, and a path forward, which I call the 8 pillars of wellness, which are really those essential habits, which of course some are food and feeding and eating, they're nutrition related, but also these other habits that we hear about all the time: sleep, movement, screen time. And how do we incorporate all of those to capitalize on physical health and emotional well-being? And as I thought through that, I also very much realized that the culture of the family, which is one of the pillars of wellness, but the culture of the family, the attitudes of the family really do influence a child's physical health and emotional well-being. And the other pillar of we need to be actively cultivating self-love in our kids, particularly in this society that we live in, whereby our children are bombarded every day with messages and images of these idealized diets and idealized bodies that most kids will never conform to. And so what does that do to their sense of worthiness?
Yeah, it is all interconnected. And I think that's what I didn't expect. And I really appreciate it. It did feel like a fresh conversation. It felt like a different way of looking at all these pieces and bringing them together. You do weave in nutrition and these things, but it is all connected to this whole child healthiness that you describe. Before we go into some of the pillars of wellness, you mentioned COVID, and I always like to ask people how COVID changed their lens in the work that they do. We talk about the effect of COVID on screen time or mental health and all these things, but in the nutrition space, because that's where you've spent a lot of your professional life working in, how did COVID impact nutrition with young people?
Yeah, so I'm still seeing the impact of COVID on the families that I work with. A lot more snacking, a lot more mindless eating, a lot more coping with food. So the emotional discomfort that some children feel about being alone or being excluded, they're turning to food more often as a way to help them cope with those emotions. And I think families also cooking way more probably than they had been before COVID. I know for my own family, all 4 of my children moved home, some of which were already launched and working in cities. They moved home and we were cooking or eating together at least 3, oftentimes 4 or 5 times a day. And that was a positive thing, I think, for many families. But for families who may not have sort of the structures around food and feeding and eating or the access to food, that proved very challenging. I think families had a lot of opportunities during COVID with nutrition and food, but I also think that it was probably very hard for families who were faced with ticks in eating and snacking and food access and availability. And how do you manage all that in a household with kids who are in the pantry all the time? I think it was hard for everybody.
I still sometimes I'm like, I can't believe we went through that. Like, how did that even happen? And so I think a lot of us are just have moved on, but not realizing that it's still kind of impacting us. Super interesting. I want to go back to one other thing you said that I wrote down that sounded interesting. You said that you think that we've prioritized physical health at the expense of emotional well-being. Can you just tease that out a little bit more for us?
In the pediatric world or in the child health world, when we encounter a child who may be in a larger body or in a smaller body, our sort of motivation is to change that size. So a child in a smaller body, we want them to get back on the growth chart, gain some weight, be at a healthier place. And for a child in a larger body, we are oftentimes suggesting that they lose weight or decrease on the weight curve on the growth chart. And in doing so, I think we have forgotten the big picture, which is that some children are naturally going to be smaller. Some children are going to naturally be larger in size. That has nothing to do with their health. It has probably more to do with their genetics than anything else, and something to do with their environmental and habits that they have. But this automatic response that we need to fix their size can be problematic because in doing so, we're basically sending a message to children that you're not good enough in the body that you're in right now. We need to change that body. And that can cause emotional harm. I've seen the harm and I'm watching the harm just in general. I mean, the harm is undeniable. We see more dysfunctional eating now than we've seen in the past. We've seen children with more disordered eating, more eating disorders. And that comes in part from perhaps not feeling good in the body that you're in, or perhaps being told that your body isn't right or isn't good enough. And I think that as a healthcare provider, and I hope for parents out there listening, that there is a toll when we're telling children that their bodies are not okay, or their eating is not okay, or their food choices are not okay. There's a potential emotional cost to that. And I think my call to action, one of the call to actions in the book, is to let's bring more sensitivity and awareness to how we're talking about health, how we're talking about bodies, how we're talking about food, because we can instill shame unknowingly and unintentionally, but we can do that. And we need to be more careful about that for our children.
Yeah, super interesting. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the other failures that you see in the way we're supporting kids' health, but we'll do that after a quick break. Have you seen J-Lo's skin lately? She's been in the spotlight for 30 years, and it's like she doesn't age. Whatever her secret is, I want in. J-Lo believes beauty is ageless and doesn't have an expiration date. That's why she created a luxurious yet affordable skincare line designed for everyday use with products that evolve with you at any age. The magic behind J-Lo Beauty is its simple 5-step routine for radiant, glowing skin. J-Lo's philosophy is that skincare should keep up with your busy life, so she created products packed with powerful ingredients in an easy morning and night regimen designed to transform your skin effortlessly. J-Lo's Beauty Deluxe Kit is the one-and-done solution, clinically proven to tighten and lift for instant, long-lasting results. It's a 5-piece set that cleanses, treats, moisturizes, and protects, leaving your skin smoother, brighter, and protected against UVA, UVB damage. I'm excited to try that Fresh Take Eye Cream since it visibly blurs and smooths fine lines and dark circles. That's exactly what I'm looking for. If you're ready for glowing skin, try J-Lo Beauty for 60 days. And if you're not satisfied, you can return the bottles, even if they're empty, and get your money back. Want that J-Lo glow? Head to jlobeauty.com/tiltparenting and get a special gift of 4 free masks for listeners of Tilt Parenting. Head to jlobeauty.com/tiltparenting for 4 free masks and free shipping today. jlobeauty.com/tiltparenting. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything. Because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Lynn, this time of year, parenting can be such a flusterclux.
You've come to the right place.
I'm Lynn Lyons, and I've been treating anxious families for over 30 years.
I'm Lynn's sister-in-law and co-host Robin Hudson.
Join us for Flusterclux, a podcast for parents who worry.
Wait, that's everybody.
Yeah, these last few years have felt like one long anxiety attack for so many.
Why do you think parents are always surprised that a podcast about anxiety relates to them, even if no one in their house has an anxiety disorder?
Well, worry is human. Everyone does it, and anxiety shows up when we face uncertainty.
All the parenting tips you've taught me have been essential.
I love to break it down into skills we need to manage worry in our families.
We've covered so many topics: depression, burnout, meltdowns, perfectionism.
Don't forget scary mothers-in-law.
Right, but of course that's not my mother-in-law.
Because that's my mother.
And a listener.
As a psychotherapist, I like to teach parents and kids how to respond to everyday moments in healthy ways.
Managing anxiety really can be taught.
It really can, and I'll even tell you what to say.
We talk about serious stuff, but without being too serious.
Anxiety wants everything serious. Anxiety doesn't stand a chance when we're laughing, even about the tough stuff.
You were just describing this focus on size and how that can instill shame, or we're focusing on food choices, or maybe just focusing on the wrong things. I guess that's my question to you would be, what else are we getting wrong? What are the things that we're doing by mistake that are inadvertently having these potential negative side effects?
Well, one of the things I think that we are getting wrong, and this is pretty systemic, is we are putting a lot of emphasis on food as the problem and as the solution. And in my experience, yes, it's one slice of the pie, but as I try to convey in my book, there are so many things that feed into your child's health and well-being. How much sleep they get. Is it quality sleep? How much time they spend in front of screens? And does that time take away their ability to move or to explore other interests? How much movement are kids getting? What's the family attitude about bodies? What are the family attitudes about food and eating? There's a lot of ingredients to this recipe for building a healthy child. And I think only focusing on food just shortchanges a lot of what parents and families can be doing out there to cultivate healthy kids who feel good about themselves.
Yeah. So you touched upon this before, but I want to go a little deeper. Again, the book is called Kids Thrive at Every Size. The subtitle is How to Nourish Your Big, Small, or In-Between Child for a Lifetime of Health and Happiness. And you have these 8 pillars of wellness. And the first one I just loved and wasn't expecting. It was cultivating a family culture. And I love that because in Differently Wired, I talked about how important it is to have a family culture that is neurodiversity affirming, that talks openly about strengths and weaknesses. And that's just kind of how we work as a family. So can you talk about what cultivating a family culture looks like, or what it means within the context of your book?
Yeah. So for me, I included family culture because I believe that children of every size, but particularly children with larger and smaller bodies, need an affirming, supportive, accepting, inclusive family culture. And that means for families to treat and feed their children the same foods. Believe it or not, some families feel that their larger child needs different foods than their average size child. And that, again, sets up this weird dynamic whereby that larger child doesn't feel included or supported. It also involves role modeling the habits and the attitudes you want your children to develop. So you want your child to be an active child, then parents need to be active parents. That's part of it. And then the other part of it is just identifying who your family is as a family. What are your values? What are your core beliefs, particularly around nutrition, food, physical activity, attitudes about body size, and inclusivity around that. And so really helping families concretely navigate what their family culture is. And I encouraged families, or I hope I encourage parents to really think about this is something that warrants thoughtfulness and can be very helpful for kids who are growing up today, as you mentioned, because it allows conversation. I give an example of a family manifesto, what the family believes and how they act and behave towards each other, and encourage a family mantra and family meetings. And so really connectivity in the family, communication in the family, but also being very thoughtful about sort of the attitudes that you want to build in your children as you're raising them.
And what about parents who have their own food baggage that they bring in? I imagine in order to really be intentional about our values as a family surrounding food, we may have our own unresolved issues or unhealthy relationships. So how do you advise parents to do their own work so that they can model an appropriate or helpful body culture in a family?
Yeah, I think the first step is just awareness. And for some parents, the awareness that you might need to do a little bit more digging is if you're feeling triggered by your child. And that could be you're triggered by what your child likes to eat or how they're eating. You might be triggered by your child's size because you might have grown up in a differently sized body and experienced some of the negative interactions related to that. So the first step is awareness, just understanding that there is some baggage. I talk a lot about feeding baggage. We come to the table with our own experiences around feeding. How we were raised as a child is oftentimes how we are going to interact with our own children around food and feeding. And so coming to terms with your own experiences may be influencing your own parenting around your child. There are lots of resources. I outline some of the resources in the book that you can go to. Obviously, working through some of these issues with a therapist, recognizing that you might be getting re-triggered if you've already worked through these things and getting re-triggered as a result of parenting your own child. But also looking at the social, cultural norms that we're living with and being curious about, are these triggering you too? Is it not just your child that's triggering you? Are you going on social media all the time and seeing organic, perfect lunchboxes and feeling the pressure to do the same for your child and getting upset or triggered or feeling less than as a parent? I'm always reminding parents that they are everything that their child needs. And if you're feeling like you can't handle something, there are professionals to reach out to work through this stuff. Communication and coaching and emotion coaching through all of these things are so helpful, I think. And the work that I do with families oftentimes does involve a lot of this. What was it like for you as a child? What is it like for you today with your own child? How can we navigate through this? And just affirming that parenting is hard. Feeding kids is hard. Raising healthy, productive citizens is not easy. And just providing parents with the validation that, they're not the only ones who are sort of navigating all of this. And it is particularly hard in our culture today, I think. Parents are getting a lot of pressure and mixed messages about what their child should be eating, what they should look like, what behaviors they should be engaged in. It can be quite hard.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about feeding for a minute because I just want to say there's a chapter on feeding. That's pillar 4 is feeding and then pillar 5 is eating. And I was like, oh, those are 2 different things. I thought that was really interesting. And I found that whole chapter on feeding so fascinating, starting with the subtitle of that chapter, which was Trust, Love, and Limits. I'm wondering if you could talk about why the words trust and love when you were talking about feeding and maybe explaining what feeding is as a concept as well.
Sure. So feeding is that interaction between the parent and the child around food. So it's how you're sitting around the table and what you're talking about and how you're trying to get your child to eat this or not eat that. That's sort of the context of what I mean by feeding. And trust is really a nod to trusting that your child knows what their body needs. When babies are born, they know exactly what they need in terms of nutrition. If you're nursing, if you've been a nursing mom, or even if you're bottle feeding mom, your baby will stop eating when they're full and when they don't want any more. What happens over time as our kids get into the toddler ages, we start to, as parents, intervene and distrust that our kids know how much to eat. And so we're trying to get them to eat more or get them to eat something different. And so the trust is really a nod to trust your child. They know how much to eat. They might not know what to eat. That's on the parent to determine what to feed them, but trust that they know when their body is full and they know when their body is hungry. Love and limits are a nod to diplomatic feeding. Diplomatic feeding has been researched through and through. It's the gold standard of how we should be feeding children. And it really means that we should be having structure with meal times and snack times, meaning predictable times in a predictable location. And limits are the boundaries. They're the no's. They're the not right nows. They're the kitchen is closed. We're not having a snack right now. We're waiting until our next mealtime. So feeding with trust, love, and limits means that you are engaged with your child. You're considerate of your child's preferences. You trust that they know when they're full. And I'll just say a little side caveat here. Not every child knows when they're full now, and not every child is appropriately hungry, which I get into in the eating pillar. But setting up a home environment where there's structure around mealtime and snack time and boundaries around access to food. That's the love and limits part of it.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for walking us through that. I want to talk about something I think you were just teasing about, which is this relationship between executive function and eating, because you talk about that in the book. So let's take a quick break and we'll do that.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.
No one told us the truth about parenthood. Why? This is the podcast everyone needed before they had kids, because now that those little ones are here, there is a lot to unpack. I'm Rachel Shepardota, and I am your host for the podcast No One Told Us, where we tell the truth about parenting and let you in on all the stuff you really should have known about before having kids. I am the founder of Hey Sleepy Baby, but this podcast is so much more than sleep. We'll be diving into all the topics that you really care about and need to know while you do your best job raising those adorable, tiny humans. Our goal is to just make you feel less alone and less overwhelmed. There are so many things that no one tells us before becoming a parent, and I think that we should really pull back the curtain on becoming a first-time or second-time mom or dad to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll have a little education, a little fun, and a whole lot of heart that goes into each and every episode. So join me and our amazing guests each week to hear us talk about what no one told us.
Hey, are you a parent of a teenager? Are you feeling overwhelmed about how to be what they need while also holding limits and boundaries that keep them safe? Are you tired of conversations that negate how messy this season of parenting is? Well, I've got you. My name is Casey O'Rourke. I am a positive discipline trainer, parent coach, and the host of the Joyful Courage podcast. Every week, I come to you with an interview digging into tough topics with experts I trust and solo shows that go deep into the personal growth and mindset needed to raise teens in a way that grows them into confident, capable young people. I am not afraid of getting real about the intersection of conscious parenting and the teen years, while also bringing in vulnerability, humor, and lightness. I'm walking the path with you and honored to serve. Listen to Joyful Courage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts.
So you were just talking about especially in that trust piece, is trusting that our child's body will tell them when they've had enough or when they're hungry. And we also know, especially with some neurodivergent kids who might have executive function challenges, they may have struggles with paying attention to cues or knowing what to do when those cues happen, or maybe not even tuning in. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between executive function and eating.
Yeah. What we know about, and I feel like I'm speaking to the choir here a little bit because I'm sure you know more about executive function than I might know. But when it comes to eating, we know that delayed gratification can be a challenge for children whose executive functioning skills are developing. We also know that impulsivity can also be a challenge for children whose executive skills are still developing. And so parents really need to be aware of that and set up the structure so that they can operate within that framework during the day and not cave into those tendencies, which may interfere with healthful eating. I like to phrase executive functioning skills as sort of on a continuum of development, because I do believe kids all get there, but they can get there at different time frames. And for children who may need more support, just thinking about like a younger child needs more structure, more support, more parental involvement, that can be the same situation for children who are developing in those areas.
Okay, so you also have a chapter about screens and media in your book. Again, it was one of those, I was like, oh, of course, right? It's all, again, interconnected. There's a lot wrapped into screens. I would love if you could talk with us a little bit about the context of screens when thinking about food and body image. Like, do you have any most important things you would want parents to know? Because I think there's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of worries about how our kids' engagement with screens is impacting our kids' emotional health, their physical health, all of those pieces.
Yeah. I'm so thankful that the presence of screens was not that prevalent when I was raising my children, because I think today it's a really hard thing. So the way I showcase screens in this book is, what are the pros? What are the cons? We know that screens can be a great educational method for children, right? There's positives about screens, but more and more, particularly when you get into social media, more and more kids are suffering. Like I mentioned before, they're getting bombarded with images of what an ideal body looks like. And, 90%, 80% of kids are not going to have an quote unquote ideal body. And so how does that instill worthiness, or how does that challenge their worthiness and potentially instill shame? Social media, and I'm not the expert on social media. I did the research as it relates to children developing emotional well-being. What I would say for families is, and also on the side, there's no real great guidelines right now around how much social media children should have, particularly as kids get older. The American Academy of Pediatrics basically says, whatever feels good for your family. And so families just really need to maybe take a deeper, wider lens look at this from the safety of what their children are using. Are their screens updated? Are their operating systems updated? Are their children's, private information not out there? So I look through and explore all of that, but also look at the impact of social media on how kids feel about themselves. And that's going to depend on the child. It's going to depend on their temperament. That's going to depend on their developmental stage, where they are. Does it impact middle schoolers less than elementary school kids? We don't know. But we know there are developmentally sensitive times where children are building their self-esteem, and that is in the elementary to middle school years and up into the high school years. And so I think what parents can do is really look at access, look at how much engagement is happening there, and be curious about the impact and influence it's having on their kids. I encourage parents to have a media diet, a safe media diet, which includes how often and what types, and also for parents to be right there online with their kids. Your child's on Instagram, you're friends with your child on Instagram. If they're on TikTok, you're seeing those videos too. Really being involved in what your child's getting exposed to and being curious about how it is affecting them positively and negatively.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. There are two concepts I want to touch upon before we wrap up. One is you talk about something called a body neutral home. So I'd love if you could explain what that is, and also talk about what parents can do to course correct if that's not really where they are right now.
Right. So a body neutral home really just focuses on the body function rather than the appearance of the body. You can have a body negative home, which is super critical about bodies, talking about people's bodies all the time, and that's not healthy for anyone, parent or child. You can have a body positive home, which your listeners may have heard about, which is really focusing on all bodies being excellent, great, no matter what, beautiful as is. And for some children, I believe, body positivity still may focus too much on appearance. And so I really lean towards body neutrality, where we're not talking about the appearance of the body at all. We're talking about function. What can the body do? And really leaning into function and not appearance. So how do you set that up in your home? Well, you don't comment about your own body in front of your children. You don't comment about other people's bodies in front of your children. You talk about bodies in ways that are very neutral. Your legs really ran fast at that race today. Your body is strong and powerful. So how can parents course correct? I think stepping back, awareness is so key. Do you disparage yourself in front of your children? Do you say things like, I wish my body didn't look like this? Or more overt things like, I can't get in that bathing suit because I'm too large. Kids internalize all these messages. If you're saying that about yourself, children may start to think, well, she must think that way about me too, or he must think that way about me too. And so really taking a step back and looking at yourself through the lens of how am I potentially talking about my own body or other people's bodies, or even my child's body. Parents do, unfortunately, speak of their children's bodies. And there's no upside to that, I don't think. I think eventually it can potentially cause harm. And so keeping this idea that just be neutral about it. Everybody's got a different body and everybody's body looks different, right? We all have the same organs on the inside. Our outsides look differently. And so really celebrating the differences rather than attaching negativity or unacceptance to differences in size.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, as you're saying that, I feel like I was having this flood of memories coming forward for me of things that were said to me about my body as I was growing up and how they're still with me at this age. I imagine there would be value in also just having a frank conversation with your kid and saying, you know what, we've been doing this and we're not going to do it anymore. And just kind of being really explicit about it. We've learned that this is harmful and we're going to do better, and let's support each other in doing that. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's that family culture piece. Those conversations are so helpful.
Yeah. At the end of your book, you have I believe it's a quiz, but you ask parents if they're size-wise. So how would you define size-wise?
That's a great question. I think it's really knowing the 8 pillars that you want to be working on, understanding where you are in that process. Some people will be just starting out, beginners, what I call learners. Some will be strivers. They're on their way. They've got a lot of good things in place, but there's some areas they can up-level. And there are thrivers who have mastered a pillar. They've got everything in place and things are just going swimmingly. Size-wise is how to raise a healthy child who also feels good about themselves. You know all the key ingredients. You're working on them or are there. And I honestly believe it's a work in progress. It's a very goal-oriented book, and it's a book that meets you where you're at and helps support you along the way. But the goal is to raise healthy, happy kids, and physically healthy, emotionally well. And there's a path to doing that. And so being size-wise is you're on that path and you know the path and you know where you're going and you've got a plan to get there.
Yeah, that's great. As a writer, I just really appreciated the organization of the book. It did feel very accessible. I love the learners, the strivers, the thrivers. There's charts. I love a good chart. And they're throughout the book. You have scripts in there for how to talk about things. I just feel it is so practical and helpful. So well done with that. Before we say goodbye, where would you like to direct listeners to learn more about your work and your book?
Sure. Thank you for that and for your comments about the book. I appreciate that. You can find me and my professional services over at jillcastle.com. And I also have a website for parents called theNourishedChild.com. And that has free articles, some courses, and also my podcast of the same name. So that can be found there. And Kids Thrive at Every Size can be found anywhere books are sold.
Awesome. Excellent. And listeners, again, I will have links to all those resources in the show notes page. Jill, I just want to say thank you so much for everything you shared today. Congratulations on the book. And yeah, I just appreciate you coming by and giving us so many great things to think about when it comes to helping our kids really thrive, no matter their size, their age, where they are in life. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with the phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at @tiltparenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.